Joe Alvarez from the Avenue here in Riverside, California. Just want to share a quick story about kind of a transformational moment for me in ministry. This is back before we came to Riverside. We were in Seattle and we I was a youth minister at the time, and I built a friendship with a neighbor in our neighborhood. We weren't very far from the church, and his name was Charles. And yeah, he was homeless by choice. He was an addict to alcohol. And over time, prayed for him, talked with him, loved on him as much as I could. I always remember telling him, hey, the church loves you, God loves you. And so, I had this really loving relationship with Charles. And one day we get this phone call at the church and it says it's the hospital. And Charles ended up being in the hospital because he was dehydrated and he had drank too much, and they found him. He was knocked out unconscious, and they took him into the emergency room. And what was amazing about that was he has family. They lived right down the street from where we lived, but he, through our friendship and relationship, he said, call my pastor. He's at this church. And the hospital called and they said, hey, your friend Charles is here. He wants to see you. And I remember going to the hospital and being overwhelmed with the sense of, wow, if, this man who doesn't come to my church, he is not a member of the church. He doesn't invest into the church. He's not a tither. He's just a homeless man by the name of Charles. And he decided to say, hey, I have a pastor, and that was me. And I was just so blown away by that. And there's where this idea, if you hear me talk in our church, we always have this concept that we are the church without walls, that our love needs to permeate outside of the walls of the church, that we should view our sanctuary with no walls to really reach those who are in desperate need. And I remember Charles, after some point, showed up to our church, and he was very, welcomed by some and not by others because he smelt and all these things, but yet he still came because he knew he had a pastor there. And, I just want to encourage you that, we are the church without walls, that God does never required us to only do ministry in our office behind our computers, that he's called us to be with the disenfranchised, the poor, the lonely, the sick, the hurting, the one that can't tithe into your church, the one that is really been hurting for a long time, has a name, but no one knows his name. Even this week, I sat with a gentleman in our park bench. His name was David, and he's been sober for 17 years, and he was telling me how he was from the hood, and he walked all the way from LA to Riverside, and it took him a month. And in this conversation we just had was about how God had saved him and transformed his life, and how he's never gone back to drinking or alcohol or how he stays celibate as well. He was just talking about how God, and yet he was a man who lived on the street. And and I gave him a cup of coffee and water. I prayed for him. I talked with him. I listened to him, and we encouraged one another. And what was amazing about that is that he encouraged me more than probably I encouraged him. And he was a man that had no name to others. He was unseen. He probably was rejected and prejudged. And yet I sat with him for 45 minutes. Instead of running into the office and turning on the computer and doing my day-to-day thing. It was a moment where God reminded me of Matthew 25. For what you've done to the least of these, you've done unto me. And so let us continue in that as the church and as the Free Methodist.